Hey guys! Welcome to the Unabridged Audiobook of Snipers, Book 2 of Zommunist Invasion. I'm the author, Camille Picott. If you enjoy the content of this channel, please support it by hitting the subscribe button and sharing the stories with your friends. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy this next installment.
Chapter 27, Airstream. Get off the road! Leo guided Stealth through a thick clump of oleander bushes lining the side of the highway. As they pushed to the other side, he spotted the McAllister's house. They were the elderly couple who used to own the feed store before they sold it and retired. Their sprawling ranch home was no more than 100 yards away down a gravel road. "Come on," he said. "We need to get out of sight." The drapes of the McAllister's house were drawn, making the house look deserted. Leo didn't relish the idea of breaking in. He hoped the McAllisters were okay, but if they'd been turned into zombies, he didn't relish the thought of having another fight on their hands. "The garage is over there." Jennifer pointed to a large, detached building with an oversized roll-up door that looked as though it had been built to house a motorhome. "Good idea. Come on." They could hide in there with the horses until the Soviets had passed. They reached the back door of the garage. It was locked. Spill threw his shoulder into it a few times. He was a big guy, tall and wide and well-muscled. The door broke open under his force. Leo would have liked to have this guy on his defensive line. The sound of the approaching car made Leo's back go rigid. He hurried to the edge of the garage, peering around the corner toward the road. A familiar Jeep drove into sight. It was the KGB agent and his pack of assholes from the Craig farm. And they had the third American soldier in the Jeep, bound and gagged in the back seat. Griggs. Chaz breathed the name. Leo hadn't even realized the man was standing behind him. The fuckers got him. To Leo's horror, the Russians turned into the McAllister's driveway and stopped in front of the house. They were probably checking every house on this road in hopes of finding Spill and Chaz. They knew the other two parachutes were out here somewhere. "They're looking for us," Chaz said grimly. "No shit. Come on, let's get inside." Leo and Chaz hustled into the garage. Jennifer and Spill already had the horses inside. Leo closed the door behind them. There was a shiny Airstream inside. It gleamed even in the gloom of the garage. The McAllisters must have bought it when they retired from the feed store. There were also two regular cars inside the garage, a brown station wagon and a blue sedan. Leo hurried over to a dirty window that overlooked the front yard. It was covered with grime and spider webs. Jennifer joined him. The two of them pressed shoulder to shoulder. The three Russians exited the Jeep. The fourth one stayed behind to guard the prisoner. He took up position just outside the vehicle, scanning the road. The KGB agent lit a cigarette and strolled around the driveway. "Why did you come after us?" Spill whispered. "You had to know the risks." "We couldn't leave you guys to be captured by the KGB," Jennifer said. The Russians fanned out around the house. For the moment, their attention wasn't on the garage. "Jen," Leo jerked his chin toward the back of the garage. To the soldiers, he said, "You guys keep watch." Spill nodded, maintaining his position at the window. Chaz took up a position on the other side of the garage door, watching from a second window that was even dirtier than the first. "Did you see how they just took orders from you?" Jennifer whispered. "They want to live." "You know what I mean." He did know. These were real soldiers, not kids playing at being soldiers. And they'd taken his orders without a second thought. It must be his football captain voice. He and Jennifer crept to the back of the garage. Leo's mind worked fast. Sooner or later, The Russians were going to check the garage. They would see the door had been broken open. They were either going to have to fight their way out of this situation or come up with a plan. That's when he heard the growl. They froze. The growl came a second time. Slowly, Leo and Jennifer turned in the direction of the airstream. For the first time, he saw past the gleaming, spotless exterior. He saw the window on the side, a window smeared with blood, and he saw bloody footprints on the garage floor leading to the motorhome. There was a zombie inside the airstream, one of the McAllisters. It was a measure of the situation that he actually perked up and realized there was a zombie in the garage with them. They just might be able to use this to their advantage. The Russians might have a vaccine to protect them from zombies, but that didn't mean zombies weren't an X factor. They might cause just enough of a distraction to help them get away. He felt like an asshole for using the McAllisters, but he whispered a plan into Jennifer's ear anyway. To his surprise, she nodded eagerly, probably because his plan involved her risking her life. Jennifer backed up and took a running start. Her foot hit the Airstream's front tire. She leaped, grabbing the top rim of the windshield. She secured a grip, digging her nails into the rim. She slung one leg sideways and easily scrambled the rest of the way onto the motorhome. She hadn't made much noise, but the zombie inside went berserk. He threw himself at the front windshield. Spill and Chaz gaped in their direction. At Leo's gesture, they fell back from the windows, scurrying for cover as shouts came from outside. They grabbed the horses and hid on the far side of the garage behind the station wagon. Leo stayed near Jennifer, ready with his machine gun if shit went sideways. Licking her lips, she dropped to her stomach and pounded with both fists against the windshield. The howls intensified within the Airstream. Leo realized Mr. McAllister wasn't alone inside. Mrs. McAllister was with him. A crack appeared in the glass as the couple beat at the windshield. Leo had a fleeting look at the two zombies. Even under the mass of infected black veins and blood, he recognized the elderly couple. They must have hidden in the Airstream, possibly planning to make a getaway in the vehicle before they both got sick and turned. Now they were going ballistic inside the Airstream. The front windshield shattered outward. Leo had just enough time to dash out of sight as the two zombies hurtled free of the Airstream. They landed inside the garage and immediately began to circle the motorhome. Leo hid near the front tire of the neighboring car, crouching down so he could look through the window to see what was happening on the other side. Jennifer was separated from the rest of them. Shit! That had not been part of the plan. He just wanted her to rile them up enough to draw the attention of the Russians so they could get away. Just to make things worse, they weren't regular zombies. They were mutant zombies. Mr. McAllister had an enlarged neck and chest. One side had grown larger than the other, causing his shoulders to be off-kilter. His gray hair was streaked with blood. Mrs. McAllister had one enlarged leg. The thigh and calf muscles had grown so large the pants had ripped. They hung in tatters. One cheekbone on her face was also distended. Coupled with her teased gray hair, she was most definitely the scarier of the two. Mr. McAllister charged the Airstream. He hit the side of it so hard he left a dent. Jennifer scurried to the center of the motorhome, putting as much distance between herself and the mutants as possible. Where were the damn Russians when they needed them? Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Spill rise up from the far side of the station wagon. Leo gave a shake of his head. This was a precarious situation. One false move, and they could all be zombie food. Mrs. McAllister took a running leap at the Airstream. She was mid-leap when the garage door burst open. 3 Russians swarmed in around the motorhome. Mrs. McAllister spun in midair. Her husband charged like a maddened bull. Leo had seen zombies interact with Russians plenty of times. They snarled and circled, but never attacked. Sometimes they even followed the Russians around and made nuisances of themselves, but that was the worst of it. Usually, the Russians just shot the ones who didn't get out of the way. That was all Leo had hoped for. Something to distract the Soviets. Something to draw their attention while Leo and his people slipped out the other door. The Russians took in the maddened zombies with cocky calm. Their gaze swept past the monsters while they scanned the garage. Then something unexpected happened. With a howl that bordered on glee, Mr. McAllister leaped on the foremost of the Russians. The monster grabbed the soldier's head between his hands, driving it to the pavement. The soldier's head cracked open like an egg, spilling blood and brains everywhere. The world seemed to stop moving. Jennifer froze in place atop the motorhome. Even the Russians were momentarily frozen in shock. The enormity of what he saw crashed down on Leo. Mutant zombies can kill Russians. In that split second, the female zombie reached the Russians. A second soldier went down with a scream of fear. The other Russian began to fire wildly. Bullets tore through the garage. The horses whinnied in fear. And still, the mutant zombies kept going. Mr. McAllister slurped a mouthful of brains before leaping at the next closest soldiers. Mutant zombies can kill Russians. Leo regained his senses. "Jennifer, horses, now!" In true Jennifer form, she completely ignored him. She leaped off the roof on the far side and climbed into the motorhome. God damn her! What the hell was she thinking? Leo was torn between going after her and getting the horses. He decided to trust Jennifer and whatever she had planned. He was halfway to the horses when the Airstream hummed to life. A second later, Jennifer floored it. The motorhome crashed right through the door. Wood and splinters flew everywhere. Leo reached the horses. Spill and Chaz were already mounted, waiting for him. Leo leaped on top of Stealth. The horses needed no urging. They whinnied and bolted toward the opening Jennifer made for them. Just before the horses burst free of the garage, Leo caught a glimpse of 3 dead Russians. The mutant zombies held chunks of brain matter in their hands, devouring it like starved animals. "Get down!" Spill bellowed, right before he opened fire on the Russian keeping watch by the car. Just as he did, the American prisoner jammed his bound feet through the side. He delivered a brutal kick to the back of the Russian's head, throwing him off balance. Spill's first bullet took the Russian through his chest. The second shot went through his forehead. Jennifer tore down the driveway in the Airstream. She pulled to a stop in front of the Jeep and jumped out. Just as she did, red bloomed on the front of Chaz's uniform. For a few seconds, he swayed atop Thunder. Then he toppled sideways to the ground. Leo looked back and saw the KGB agent. He'd been hit by the Airstream and was a bloody mess, but the bastard was still alive. Leo jerked his horse around and started firing, gunning down the KGB agent. The bastard died in a pool of his own blood. "Chaz!" Jennifer grabbed the front of the uniform and shook him. Spill jumped off Stealth and joined her. Leo stayed on his horse. One look told him Chaz was gone. "We have to go, guys," he said. "There could be more Soviets on the way." Spill swore, then hustled over to the jeep. He cut his friend free. "Guys," he said, "this is Griggs. Griggs, these are members of the snipers." "Get on." Leo held out a hand to Griggs. "We're getting the hell out of here." He pulled the other man onto stealth. Spill climbed on behind Jennifer. Leo led them away from the slaughter at a gallop. He looked back only once. He saw the mutants still crouched over the bodies of the dead Russians, feasting. The sight should have comforted him, or at the very least brought a sense of twisted satisfaction. Instead, it made his blood run cold. Chapter 28. News. They were a mile from the Chiquino farm when Leo slowed the horses to a walk. He wanted to scout the area near his home to make sure there were no Soviets lurking nearby. What were those things that killed the Russians?" Griggs asked. "They were like zombies, but different." The soldier they'd rescued from the Soviet jeep had close-cropped brown hair and a large nose. He'd taken a brutal beating from the Russians. His face was swollen and bloody. His nose might be broken. "Those were mutant zombies," Jennifer said. "They're stronger than regular zombies, smarter, and they eat brains." "Russian brains," Leo said. This was a game changer. They'd have to keep this info close to the vest in case they could use it to their advantage down the road. "They eat regular brains, too," Jennifer said softly. Leo didn't respond. "We'll keep you safe," Griggs said to Jennifer. She snorted and rolled her eyes at him. "Last I checked, I was the one keeping you safe." The soldier looked abashed by this. "She's fiercely independent," Leo said. "If you want to get on her good side, leave her to fend for herself." "You're not being fair," Jennifer said. "I just want to be treated equally, not like a porcelain doll. I have a lot to contribute to this war." Leo didn't have the energy to debate the topic with her. "Tell me," Griggs said, "why are nice kids like you going around rescuing dirty thugs like us from Soviets?" Nice kids? That rankled, but Leo did his best to ignore it. It wasn't Spill's fault if he'd assumed the snipers were a bunch of adults. Jennifer wasn't about to let the comment slide. "Nice kids? Is that all you have to say about the people who rescued your asses from zombies, mutants, and Russians?" Leo cut in before she could get into an argument with their new allies. He wanted to fight with these guys, not against them. "We've made it our mission to protect our West County from the Russians," Leo said. "We fight when we can. We broadcast important information when we can." He paused before plunging ahead to ask his own question. "What else can you tell us about what's going on? We haven't had any communications from the outside world since the day of the invasion." "It's not good," Griggs said. "Those communist bastards got us good. They seized both coastlines of the country. They sent soldiers in on Greyhound buses from Mexico and Canada. They took out our communication stations. It was a large-scale, well-coordinated attack." "We told you about the charter planes," Spill said. "The Nezhit infection has spread everywhere. There are a few safe zones out there. Some are held by civilian forces, others by law enforcement. A few military bases have dug in and are making a stand against the infection. The majority of our forces are fighting the infected. We've seen some of them start to die off, but for every one that dies, it seems like two more replace them. In the meantime, the Soviet bastards are getting cozy in our country." "Where are you guys from?" Jennifer asked. "Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada," Griggs replied. "Our people are fighting a huge wave of infected that spread out from Vegas." "How many of you are there?" Leo asked. Neither Spill nor Griggs responded. Unease prickled the base of Leo's spine. He turned around on Thunder to look at both men. "How many?" he repeated. "A few thousand. We were over 10,000 with retirees before the infection." Spill's face was tight. Leo felt like he'd been punched in the face. Jennifer, brave, fearless Jennifer, actually paled at this statement. "Our commanding officer heard your broadcasts," Spill continued. "You're one of the few civilian guerrilla teams we know of. You happen to be in a strategic position. We were sent to enlist your help in stopping the second offensive." This was the second time Spill said the government needed their help. Hearing it again was unsettling. All the time they'd been waging their guerrilla war, they thought they just had to hold out against the Soviets until the big guns arrived. Apparently, the big guns were the two men riding horseback with them. This just might be the worst news of Leo's entire life, which was saying something. "We'll explain all the details when we get back to your base of operation," Griggs said. "We'll want to lay out the full details of the plan with whoever is in charge of your group." It was a measure of the situation that Jennifer made no comment to this. Leo didn't bother correcting Griggs. His mind was too busy working overtime to reassemble a new worldview. He'd never dreamed things were so bad. "When we first heard DJ Sniper broadcast, it was a huge morale boost," Spill said. "Knowing there were civilians out there fighting the good fight—" "Jennifer, stop!" He drew his handgun, aiming at a cluster of trees a few hundred yards up the road. Leo and the others were instantly alert. He raised his rifle, studying the road ahead of them. There was a tight cluster of eucalyptus trees growing beside the road. "What is it?" Leo asked. "I saw a guy," Spill replied. "He's armed." "Soviet?" Leo said. "Not sure. He didn't have a uniform, but he had a machine gun." "Just a single guy?" Jennifer asked. "Yeah, one guy." Leo decided to take a chance, even though it would tip their hand if he was wrong. "Tate," he called. "Tate, is that you?" A second later, an answer came. "It's me, Leo. You guys okay? Who are those guys with you?" Leo's shoulders slumped with relief. "We found the paratroopers, Tate. They're with us. It's safe to come out." He lowered his weapon. Tate popped out of the trees. Griggs and Spill remained wary. They lowered their weapons, but they didn't put them away. Leo watched Spill and Griggs size up Tate. He could understand their wariness. In less than 24 hours, Tate had permanently changed. Losing Jim had transformed him. His eyes were hard and flat. He stalked down the road like a predator, holding his machine gun like he was ready to deliver major damage. Tate stopped when he was 10 feet away, sizing up Spill and Griggs much the way they were sizing him up. "You guys the soldiers who jumped out of the plane?" "Yeah." Spill holstered his weapon, apparently deciding Tate wasn't a threat. "I'm Lieutenant Spillane. This is Lieutenant Griggs." Tate grunted. "You guys here to bring reinforcements?" "They're here for our help," Jennifer said. Tate grunted again. "Figures." "Where are your parents?" Leo asked. Did you take them up to the cabin?" Tate's lips compressed into a thin line. "Dad won't leave the farm." "What?" The KGB had paid them a visit, for crying out loud. Leo couldn't think of a better motivation to get the hell out of Dodge. It had been dumb luck the plane had arrived before things went sideways on the Craig farm. "Dad won't leave the farm," Tate ground out. "And Mom won't leave Dad. Dad says the farm is his home and he won't leave it." "We have to convince them," Jennifer said. "It's not safe. What if more KGB agents come back to interrogate them?" Tate's eyes hardened. "You ever try to convince a third-generation Irishman to do something he doesn't want to do?" It was clear from the look on his face that he'd done everything he could to convince his parents to leave. "He thinks he and Mom have enough plausible deniability to satisfy any other KGB agents who come their way." Leo didn't know what to say. He knew for certain he wouldn't want his family members on the Craig farm. "We could force them," he offered. He didn't like the idea, but he'd do it for his friend. Tate shook his head. "Dad made his decision. Come on, let's get back to the cabin." He retrieved the stocky mare from the eucalyptus trees. "You sure?" Leo had a sick vision of himself and Tate forcing the Craigs to leave their farm at gunpoint. "I'm sure." Tate rode away. Jennifer and Leo exchanged a long look. He saw his worry etched in her expression. "It's not safe for them," she said. "They must know that." Leo sighed and shook his head. "It's not our decision. Come on, let's get home." He forced the Craigs from his mind, but sick dread for their safety lodged in his gut. Chapter 29. Soldiers. Tensions were high at the cabin. Leo, Tate, and Jennifer had been gone for hours, much longer than necessary to deliver news of a deceased loved one. And then there had been that plane, the one shot down from the sky. To Cassie, it looked like the missile had come from somewhere near the Craig farm. Everyone was dealing with the stress differently. Anton and Bruce, who had returned from their supply run, sat on the porch cleaning every weapon they could get their hands on. Nona and Amanda were busy inside making more bombs. Dal and Lena had joined Cassie and Stevenson. The four of them were busy organizing the supplies Anton and Bruce had brought back. Even though the two guys had been forced to travel by bike, they'd brought back an impressive amount of supplies. They'd filled several large duffel bags with food, which they hung on either side of the bikes like saddlebags. They filled backpacks and hung them from the front handlebars. Another backpack went on each of their backs. They'd even managed to catch 3 chickens. The birds had been tied around the ankles and lashed atop the duffel bags. Now they pecked and scratched around the yard. Nona worried they'd attract coyotes and mountain lions, but even she couldn't argue against fresh eggs. They would just have to lock them up at night and hope for the best. As Cassie sorted through a large pile of bagged rice, she kept thinking about Leo and Jennifer. She tried to be positive, but doubt and fear crept in. The idea that something may have happened to one or both of them had her close to tears several times. If Stevenson hadn't insisted on alphabetizing all the supplies, she'd probably be losing her mind right now. She listed out all the reasons why Jennifer would make it back alive. A. She was smart. B. She was athletic. C. She didn't like it when anyone told her no. In fact, if she heard the word no, she went to great lengths to disprove the word. Cassie racked her brain for more reasons. There had to be more. luck didn't count. How about beauty? Did that count as a skill? Cassie decided to go with it. D. Jennifer was beautiful. Things happened for her purely because she was beautiful. Just because looks hadn't saved anyone from zombies didn't mean it wouldn't save Jennifer. Right? How about Leo? There was a long list of reasons why he would be okay. A. He was good in a crisis. B. He was strong, smart, and decisive. C. He was practically invincible. D. He was Leo Cecchino, for crying out loud. She was desperate for them to be okay. They had to be okay. Cassie had just added the rice count to the inventory sheet when a shout went up from outside. "They're back!" Anton cried. "Guys, they're back!" His footsteps thumped on the stairs overhead. Cassie dropped everything and rushed outside. She emerged into the sunlight just as Leo, Jennifer, and Tate rode on to Pole Mountain. All three of them were dirty, bruised, and bloody. What the hell had happened? As she ran to the horses, she didn't know who to hug first, Leo or Jennifer. Leo made the decision for her. He jumped off Stealth and swept her up, lifting her feet a few inches off the ground as he squeezed her in a hug. "It's so good to see you," he murmured, planting a kiss just below her earlobe. "What took you guys so long?" she asked. Before she could answer, Jennifer marched up to them. "I said you could date her, Leo, not hog her." Cassie grabbed her sister in a hug and asked her the same question. "What took you guys so long?" That's when she noticed the newcomers. Soldiers. American soldiers from the looks of their uniforms. There was a dark-skinned Filipino man whose name patch read Spillane. The other man had dark hair and a very large nose. His patch read Griggs. The clearing went quiet as everyone gaped at the soldiers. Cassie's face broke into a grin. This is what they'd been waiting for since the start of the invasion. Help! Help had finally come. With any luck, this war would be over soon. The man with the big nose ruined the moment. "Jesus Christ! You're all a bunch of kids! Who's in charge around here?" That earned him a ferocious whack on the back of his head from Nona. "You will not take the Lord's name in vain around here," she said severely. "Jesus, lady, Nona whacked him a second time, this time harder. Leo rested a hand on Griggs's shoulder. "Now listen to her, man. She's not being metaphorical." The two soldiers stared at them, realization finally dawning in their eyes. Cassie could understand their shock. Hell, they were a bunch of kids. Although Cassie was technically old enough to vote, she was still a senior in high school. She wondered what was more shocking, the fact that they were all really young, or the fact that they were young and looked like battle-hardened soldiers. Anton and Bruce both held machine guns, looking ready to charge into battle at a moment's notice. Dal and Lena, who both had rifles, could clearly hold their own. Even Nona had a rifle in her hands. Hell, even Amanda had come out of the cabin with a .22. Tate looked downright scary. Losing his older brother had changed him. Of everyone here, only Cassie and Stevenson were unarmed. "Who's in charge around here?" Griggs demanded at last. Everyone turned to Leo. "Why didn't you tell us?" Spill asked. Leo shrugged. "Sorry, Spill. I wasn't sure you'd believe me until you saw for yourself." "These are the snipers?" Griggs said. A bunch of kids and an old lady? We disrupted a major military operation in Hillsburg yesterday, Anton said coldly. Before that, we launched an offensive in Bastopol that took out troops and allowed us to send out a broadcast. Fuck me. We are so fucked. We came all this way for nothing. Spill looked like he needed to sit down, or maybe pour himself a stiff drink. All he got was a whack in the back of the head from Nona. We do not tolerate that sort of language on Chiquino land, she told him flatly. Nona, is there any food? Leo asked. These guys have come a long way for our help. Then they were shot out of the sky by Russians. They've had a long day. Nona's lips compressed. There's food inside for anyone who has manners. Her gaze was severe as she sized up the two soldiers. Griggs, Spill, think you can keep a civil tongue? Leo asked. When they nodded, he said, Great, let's go inside and eat. He took Cassie by the hand and led her inside. Chapter 30. Photos. The meal was a demoralizing one. All this time, they'd been waiting for American troops to arrive and save the day. Instead, all they got were two soldiers from a military safe zone in Nevada. Rather than bringing news of impending hope and triumph, they brought news of a full-scale invasion that reached far beyond the scope of West County, as well as a raging war against the infected. We have new information on the mutants, Jennifer said. The Russian vaccine doesn't work on them. She told everyone how they'd seen mutants attack and kill Soviets. That's a good piece of intel, Anton said. Maybe we can figure out how to use it to our advantage. Dal, make sure you don't broadcast that. We need to keep this to ourselves for now, Leo agreed. His free hand kept straying under the table to touch Cassie's knee. She wasn't sure if he was trying to comfort her or himself. Which one of you is DJ Sniper? Spill asked. Me. Dal raised his hand from the end of the table where he sat with Lena. We heard you all the way in Nevada, Griggs said. It's the reason our commanding officer sent us here. What's the mission you need help with? Leo asked. We should speak alone, Spill said. What we have to say is classified, Griggs added. A ripple of discontent ran through the table. Jennifer looked like she was considering scratching out the eyeballs of both soldiers. Leo shook his head. Everyone you see here fights the Russians. We risk our lives every day for our country. No one on my team operates in the dark. You speak to all of us, or none of us. A silent exchange passed between Leo and the soldiers. Leo stared at them without blinking. Griggs looked like he wanted to push the issue, but it was clear there was no way to do that without getting into an argument, which would just make him look stupid. Fine, Spill said at last. We'll do it your way. Don't say I didn't warn you. What we have to say is disturbing. Cassie couldn't keep her mouth shut any longer. Define disturbing, she said. You might be surprised by what we've seen that qualifies as disturbing. Leo's face didn't change, but Cassie could have sworn she saw a spark in his eye when he looked at her. They all dispersed from the kitchen table, moving into the sitting area. Cassie took her customary seat at the hearth, setting up her chess pieces. Leo stood above her, leaning with one arm against the mantel. Everyone else took seats on the floor and sofas. Spill and Griggs stood in front of the pair of bookshelves filled with back issues of National Geographic and spy novels with faded spines. According to Leo, Grandpa Chiquino had been an avid reader. "It was your broadcast that tipped us off to the second offensive," Spill began. "Our subs were able to take out most of them." "Most of them?" Leo said sharply. Spill's lips tightened. "Most of them," he confirmed. He reached into a fanny pack that Cassie hadn't noticed before. He pulled out a handful of black and white photos and tossed them onto the coffee table. Leo picked up a few of the photos, holding them so Cassie could see. She paused her chess game just long enough to look at them. They were pictures of two very large cargo ships. The emblem of the USSR was emblazoned on the outside, and they were docked inside a port. "These are satellite photos from just 2 days ago," Griggs said. "Those ships are docked in Southern California. They contain the troops of the Second Offensive." Cassie saw soldiers in some of the photos as Leo leafed through them, but she saw regular people too, women and children. "There are more than just soldiers on these ships," she said. "Black pawn to G4, white knight to C7. "You're right," Spill said. "The civilians you see are the families of the soldiers." Cassie felt like the breath had been squeezed from her lungs. "Those are colony ships," she whispered. Black bishop to B6, white pawn to G7. "Bingo! Gold star for you, sweetheart." Griggs took a step back when Leo leveled a glare at him. Leo might not knock people in the back of the head like Nona, but his impact didn't fall far short when he was angered. Griggs plowed on, looking uncomfortably away from Leo. "The Soviets are planning a full-scale occupation." All the pieces snapped together in Cassie's mind. Colonization. It all made perfect sense. The virus, the systematic infection. It was all part of a greater plan to seize American soil. This went far beyond a military occupation. This was a full-scale takeover. "That's why they've been rounding up people and infecting them in large groups," she said. White rook to A7. "They're speeding up the annihilation. They're sending colonists to West County, aren't they?" "This is farm country," Griggs replied. "They need people to work the land. There are 3 buses of Soviet colonists on their way here. Even more are on their way to the Central Valley, where there's even more farmland." "It's not just colonists," Spill said. "There are more soldiers coming, too." "When?" Jennifer demanded. "Lucky for us, Southern California is a fantastic mess." Spill's eyes darted toward Nona before he pulled more pictures out of his fanny pack. "There are zombies everywhere. It's taking them a long time to clear the roads." The next group of pictures he passed around showed bulldozers on the streets, rounding up dead bodies. The pictures after that showed giant funeral pyres where the bodies were burned. It made Cassie sick. "When will the colonists be here?" Jennifer asked. 2 days from now," Spill said. 3 at most. Black bishop to C5. "By the time the colony ships arrive, they expect most of the west coast to be empty," Cassie said. "The people need to know. I need to get on the radio." Dal nodded his hands in Lena's shoulders. Presumably, he was massaging the tension out of her, although based on the wince from Lena, Cassie wasn't sure it was working. "This is why we need your help," Spill said. "The only direct way into West County is over the Luma Bridge." Luma. It was a city perched on a peninsula on the southern edge of West County. The Luma Bridge connected the peninsula to the entire Bay Area west of San Francisco. If someone were to blow up the Luma Bridge, there would be no direct access to West County, Cassie said. Getting rid of the bridge will hamstring their supply line. They'll have to go miles and miles out of their way to transport resources out of here. Bingo! Griggs gave her a dry, humorless smile. Why can't the subs blow it up? Anton asked. Missiles are finite, Spill replied, and the military doesn't have a lot of them. The missiles on the subs are being saved to defend the coastline in case more Soviet ships come our way. What about the Central Valley? Cassie asked. How are you going to protect that farmland from colonization? The land is wide open. Griggs raised a condescending eyebrow at her. You're a smart one. Let me guess. Captain of the chess club? He said it sarcastically as he took in her chessboard, but his derision faded when he saw the expressions around him. The Central Valley isn't our mission, Spill said. That's been assigned to another group. Our mission is the Luma Bridge. You need us to help you take it out, Leo said. Our commanding officer thought you were trained professionals, Spill grimaced. But those are our orders. Coordinate an attack with the snipers and take out the Luma Bridge. Wait a sec. Anton hustled over to the bookcase and pulled out Nona's copy of the Anarchist's Cookbook. There's a whole section in here on blowing up bridges. He slapped the book down on the coffee table. Griggs and Spill looked nonplussed. Where did you guys get that? Griggs asked. Without looking up from the book, Anton jerked his thumb in Nona's direction. Ask my grandma. It's hers. When the two soldiers turned surprised expressions in Nona's direction, she gave them a flat stare. My village barely survived Hitler, she said. I never intended to be caught empty-handed if the Nazis came here. Turns out it pays to be prepared. I'll say. Spill crouched down eagerly beside Anton. Can I see? He leaned in beside Anton, studying the pages. Here. Anton stabbed his finger at a page in the cookbook. The Luma Bridge is a truss bridge. This shows us exactly where to place the bombs to disable the bridge. There are guards on the bridge, Spill said. We're going to have to take them out before we can blow up the bridge. We can handle the guards, no problem. Let me see the book. Bruce elbowed his way forward. So did everyone else, all trying to see the book at once. Cassie stayed where she was, turning her attention to her chessboard so she could think more clearly. She had just castled the Black King on the Queen's side when Leo sat down next to her. Cassie? She didn't look up. Yeah? What's your take on the situation? Her fingers moved swiftly over the board as she played. Black pawn to F2. They're right. We have to blow up the Luma Bridge. It's the logical move. White pawn to C6. Blowing up the bridge isn't the question, Leo replied. That's a given. It's the trip to Luma I'm worried about. How are we supposed to get there? Russians are everywhere. You saw how they blew that plane to smithereens. If they catch us on the road, we could all be turned over to the KGB. White queen to F7. Checkmate. Cassie wrinkled her nose as she studied the board. This was not her most elegant game. She sighed and began resetting the board for another round. Uneasy glances went around the room. Cassie was pretty sure everyone would prefer taking a bullet over being captured by the KGB. Leo's question had already been on her mind before he asked it. She worked through the options in her head. A, they could walk. This was only a good idea if they wanted to spend the next 2 weeks getting to Luma. She quickly crossed this off her mental list. B. They could take a car. This was only a viable option if they thought luck was on their side. The last thing Cassie wanted was to rely on luck. People who relied on luck lost chess games. Winning a game happened with tactics and strategy. You always had to be thinking 3 to 5 moves ahead and have contingency plans. She crossed this off the mental list too. C. They could take the horses and bikes. This wasn't a bad option. Both forms of transportation had served them well so far. Then again, they'd never gone more than 10 or 15 miles. Luma was a solid 40 miles away. They could run into a lot of trouble over the course of 40 miles. D. There was one more option. She was almost embarrassed to say it out loud, but it was the best she'd come up with in the last few minutes. "We take the river," she said. "The river?" Anton frowned at her. "How do you figure?" "The Russian River is less than a mile from here." How ironic that the local river had been named the Russian River. "It's unlikely the river is being patrolled, but we can go at night just in case. The water empties into the Pacific Ocean 10 or so miles north of Luma. We'll ride the river south as far as we can, then find bikes or a car to get us the rest of the way to the bridge." "You want to swim all that way?" Lena frowned at her. "The river isn't that deep, but that's still a long way to swim." Cassie shook her head. "No, we don't swim. We steal kayaks from the Adventure Depot. We paddle down the Russian River." The Adventure Depot was a small shop in Westville that sat on the Russian River. It rented canoes, kayaks, and inner tubes. Leo's parents had taken the family paddling down the river a few times over the years. Leo squeezed Cassie's shoulder. "It's a good plan," he said. "We take a team to the river, then take the back roads to Luma and blow up the bridge." "It's not just blowing up the bridge." Cassie's mouth went dry, her heart beating a little too fast in her chest. She swallowed against the discomfort of what had to be said next. "We have to blow up the buses." The impact of those words changed something inside her. She felt a piece of her heart shrivel up and die. Is this what war did to people? She wasn't the only one impacted by her statement. She saw it in the eyes of everyone around her. They knew what she was saying. She wasn't just saying they had to blow up buses full of armed soldiers. That was only part of it. The buses headed their way also had families on them. Women, children, maybe even grandparents. It was their only move. You couldn't win a game of chess if you let your opponent quadruple the number of pieces on the board. Sure, they could hamstring the supply line. That could really make it difficult for the Soviets to get in and out of West County. But in the end, that would only be an inconvenience. The buses would still come. The farmland of this area was still a prime target. The only way to protect it was to get rid of the invaders who wanted to take it from them. It would be checkmate for the snipers and everyone else in West County if they did any less. "The girl is right," Griggs said. His face was grim, but she thought she saw a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "We have to take out the bridge when the buses are on them. Spill and I each have enough C4 to rig the bridge." "In for a penny, in for a pound," Tate said. "No one said war is pretty." "It's our duty to protect our home, no matter the cost," Leo said reluctantly. "Cassie is right. We have to rig the bridge and blow it when the buses arrive. We have to make sure there are no invaders left to come to West County. Any volunteers?" Everyone except Stevenson and Nona raised their hands. "Dal, you and Lena have to stay here," Leo said. "The broadcasts are important. You guys need to keep those up no matter what. Amanda, you've been going on their missions. I want the three of you to stay together." Leo went around the room, pointing as he went. "Anton, Bruce, Tate, all of you are going to Luma." He reluctantly shifted his gaze to Cassie and Jennifer. He wanted her to stay behind. Cassie saw it in his eyes. He wanted to protect her. Jennifer's mouth opened angrily. Fire was in her eyes. Cassie cut her off with a small shake of her head. To Leo she said, "Did you know the Queen used to be one of the weakest pieces on the chessboard?" The question caught him off guard. "What?" "The Queen used to be one of the weakest players on the board," Cassie repeated. "She used to be like the king. She could only move one square at a time. The game changed in the 15th century after queens like Eleanor of Aquitaine came into power. People realized queens had power in their own right." She idly picked up the black queen off the board, turning it between her fingers. "She's the most powerful piece in the game now. It can be hard to win a game without the queen." Her eyes met Leo's. She saw the fear in them. He just wanted to protect her. That knowledge warmed her all the way down to her toes. But this was war. She couldn't afford to be sidelined just because a boy cared about her. They all had to do their part. No one can assess a situation like Cassie. Jennifer moved to stand behind her. She came up with the major plays for the Hillsburg attack. She just came up with the best way to infiltrate Luma while everyone else was standing around. Cassie wasn't a queen. She knew that. At best, she was a bishop, an advisor to the king. But bishops were valuable players in their own right. "You really don't want to be on Jennifer's bad side in battle," Anton said. "We all know she fights like a wildcat." Cassie smiled up at her sister. Jennifer was the queen. Everyone knew it. She was strong and fierce and fearless, like a real queen. She was every bit the warrior that Eleanor of Aquitaine had been. Leo broke eye contact, running a hand through his hair. When he spoke, his eyes were full of misgiving. "You guys are both on the team. We need you."
Would you like to listen to this unabridged audiobook without commercials? Head over to my online store at Authors Direct, where all of my audiobooks are $7.99 or less. You can download the free Authors Direct app to listen to the story on the go, or you can listen directly on your computer using their online listening device. The link to my Authors Direct store is in the show notes. Thanks so much.
Chapter 31. Change of Plans. The next morning before breakfast, Leo found himself standing hand in hand with Cassie. Ever since returning with the American soldiers yesterday, he hadn't strayed far from her side. They'd even fallen asleep in the living room last night, cocooned together on the worn leather sofa under a small throw blanket. Nona had scolded them, but Leo had just shrugged it off. Now they stood with the rest of the snipers on the back side of the cabin. Spill carved the name of the soldier they'd lost yesterday into their not-forgotten wall. He'd been shot and killed by a KGB agent. As had been customary, Nona brought her small tray with shot glasses and a grappa bottle. It was a fresh bottle. Even though they only drank to remember their fallen, they were going through the supply of liquor quickly. Lieutenant Charles Higgins. Spill carved his name out beneath Jim's. Griggs sidled up beside Leo. "I'm sorry about how I reacted to you guys yesterday," he said. "I was an ass. I'm sorry for your losses." "Apology accepted," Leo said. "We weren't what you expected." "No?" Griggs's eyes were fixed on the names carved into the back of the cabin. Cassie realized that to Griggs, the Wall of Not Forgotten gave legitimacy to the snipers. It was proof they weren't just a pack of brainless kids playing with guns. "Did you guys hear that?" From the other side of the semicircle, Tate straightened. Leo strained his ears. All he could hear was the whine of the cicadas in a nearby tree. "I just hear the bugs," Anton said. "I think it's a car." Tate took off, sprinting for the overlook that provided them with a view of the country road that snaked below Pole Mountain. Shit! Leo took off after him. He took the long way, dashing into the house to get the binoculars. By the time he got to the overlook, which was nothing more than a small field of boulders perched on the side of Pole Mountain, everyone else was there. They watched as several cars drove down the long dirt road that led away from the Craig farmhouse. Tate snatched the binoculars from Leo. "God damn it!" he roared. "Those fuckers have Mom and Dad!" He flung the binoculars to the ground and let loose a wordless scream of frustration. "Fuck! I tried to warn him! The idiot wouldn't listen!" It was a measure of the situation that Nona did not react to Tate's use of foul language. Tate stormed off. Anton and Bruce followed him back to the house. Leo picked up the binoculars. They were scratched on one side, but thankfully intact. He raised them to his eyes. The sight below him made him want to vomit. There were 3 jeeps down there, all of them crammed with Soviets. In the middle jeep sat Mr. and Mrs. Craig, distinct in their dirty farm coveralls. The Soviets had come for them. Leo felt sick. He was too far away to do anything about it. Even if they grabbed the truck, the Russians would be long gone by the time they got to the bottom of Pole Mountain. Tate stormed back out of the cabin. On his heels were Anton and Bruce. Tate looked like he was planning to single-handedly take on the Russian army. He was loaded down with machine guns and bombs. "I'm going to get Mom and Dad," he growled. "Me and Bruce are going with him," Anton said. The 2 former varsity football players were similarly loaded down with firearms. Leo's mouth tightened. This wasn't good. He needed these guys for the Luma mission. What would he do if that was his family down there? He sure as hell wouldn't give a flying fuck about the Luma Bridge. Leo felt his heart constrict with empathy for his friend, but he tamped it down. Empathy didn't apply to war. They had to think strategically, like Cassie, like when she pointed out they had to blow up the buses filled with families of invaders. He put a hand on Tate's shoulder. "Tate, there's nothing you can do for them." Tate shook him off angrily. "They're my parents, Leo. What would you do if that were your dad down there with the KGB? What if it were Anton or Lena?" "You don't know where they're being taken." Leo was surprised by how level his voice was. "Even if by some miracle you find them, what can you do? They'll be under Soviet lock and key. At best, it will be a suicide mission. At worst, you'll get yourself captured. The best thing you can do is honor their sacrifice and carry out our next mission. Luma Bridge is our priority." "Leo, you're being a complete ass," Anton said angrily. "Those are his parents." Leo rounded on him. "Dad sacrificed himself so Dal and Lena could escape from Rossi. He did what had to be done. He gave Tate and Anton hard looks. He hated himself for his next words, but they had to be said. This is war. Sacrifices must be made. Tate went rigid with fury. Fuck you, Leo. Leo met him glare for glare. I'm sorry about your parents, man. I really am. But I won't let you throw yourself away on a pointless mission. You won't let me? Since when are you the boss of me, Leo Chiquino? Tate stormed off around the back of the cabin, swearing as he went. I don't even know you right now, Anton said. He stormed off after Tate. Bruce hung back. This fucking sucks. His face was a mixture of frustration and resignation. Lena took a step after Anton and Tate, but Leo put an arm out to stop her. Let him cool off. She pursed her lips and nodded reluctantly. Leo caught Spill and Griggs looking at him. To his surprise, they gave him nods of respect. Irony turned his mouth sour. Everyone inside, he said. We need to pack for Luma. The priority is weapons and food. They clomped up the steps of the cabin, a grim air hanging over everyone. They were nearly all inside when the whinny of a horse cut through the clearing. Leo jerked around in time to see Stealth and Thunder burst out of the trees. Anton and Tate leaned low across the horses, riding like hell for the road. Anton! Leo bellowed. His little brother never looked up. He was gone in the blink of an eye, disappearing with Tate down the steep road that led away from Pole Mountain. Leo felt all the oxygen leave his body. He gripped the porch railing to keep himself upright. Anton! Lena screamed, racing out of the cabin. Dal grabbed her. She struggled in his arms, but he held her tight. They're gone, Lena. We have to stop them. Tears ran down Lena's face. The sight of his sister's devastated face nearly bent Leo in two. He shoved it down and faced her. Anton and Tate made their decision, he said flatly. We have to stop them, Lena repeated. We'll never catch them. They have the fastest horses. The stocky old mare would never be able to catch the stallions. Even if she could, what then? Short of shooting Tate and Anton, there was nothing Leo could do to stop them. They made their choice. He turned back to the cabin, forcing thoughts of Anton and Tate from his mind. Nona briefly met his gaze as he marched inside. Her eyes were pinched with grief, but he saw steel in the set of her jaw. I'll warm up the leftover stew, was all she said. Leo stood in front of the bookcase as everyone shuffled quietly back into the cabin. Leo waited for them all to gather around him. The mission is still on, he said. We leave for Luma at dusk. Spill, Griggs, show us what you brought with you from the plane crash. We need to assess our weapons and figure out what we're taking to the bridge. Spill and Griggs wordlessly grabbed their packs and opened them up in front of the fireplace. When they glanced up at Leo, he saw something different in their eyes. They didn't look at him with reluctant acceptance. They looked at him the way his players used to look at him on the football field. They looked at him with the silent expectation for him to lead. Everyone here did. Is this what it took to win respect in wartime? A person had to turn his back on family and friends to be a true leader? Leo didn't like the person he was becoming, but he was helpless to stop it. Chapter 32. Road to Westville. Cassie stood in a tight circle with Amanda and Stevenson on the cabin porch. To the west, the sun sat low in the sky. It was almost time to leave for Luma. "Stay close to Leo," Stevenson said. "He'll protect you." "Remember our shooting lessons," Amanda said. "When the time comes, don't hesitate to pull the trigger." "Look out for snapping turtles in the river," Stevenson said. "I got bitten by one of those things once. It sucked big time." "Make sure you get out of the water before you exit Nick's Cove. Otherwise, you could get swept out to the ocean," Amanda said. "There are jellyfish out there, and sharks, and the riptide, you know." "Unabridged is probably crawling with Soviets," Stevenson shivered. "Let the soldiers go first. You should stay at the back of the group." "Guys!" Cassie held up her hands to forestall any more advice. "I promise I'll be careful." She gave them both smiles, her throat suddenly tight. "Thanks for caring." "Of course we care." Amanda grabbed her in a hug. Stevenson joined them, the three of them standing together. "Remember that tournament in Santa Clara when we had to go up against those snobby kids from that fancy private school?" Amanda asked. "Yeah," Stevenson grinned. "One girl cornered Cassie in the bathroom and tried to intimidate her by talking crap to her face. Cassie kicked her ass on the chessboard." Amanda beamed at her through misty eyes. Cassie smiled at the memory, tears pricking her eyes. The days of high school and chess tournaments felt like 1,000,000 miles ago. Why did her friends act like she was saying goodbye forever? "I'll only be gone for a few days," she said, doing her best to comfort them. "Probably 2 days, 3 at the most." "Luma just seems so far away," Amanda whispered. "It feels like you're going to another planet." "Just another town." Cassie tried to make her voice perky. "Just pretend I'm away at a championship tournament you guys didn't qualify for." That cleared the tears out. 2 sets of eyes narrowed at her. "You wish," Amanda said. "There wasn't a single championship tournament all 3 of us didn't qualify for," Stevenson said. His voice lowered. "But you were always the best player, Cassie." "Time to go, Cass." Leo came up behind her and rested a hand on her shoulder. "Sorry to break up the goodbye party." His eyes were sincere as he spoke. "Just bring her back in one piece, okay?" Amanda said. Leo gave them a solemn nod. "I will." His words warmed Cassie. She leaned into him as he slid an arm around her. Stevenson and Amanda swooned at the sight. Together, Leo and Cassie filed down the porch steps. Jennifer, Bruce, Spill, and Griggs waited for them, each of them already on a bike. "Did you remember the dry bag?" Nona asked Leo. "The bombs can't get wet." "All the bombs are in the dry bag." Leo tugged the strap of his backpack for emphasis. He had his hunting rifle, Soviet machine gun, and a .22. From the looks of him, there was no mistake that he was going to war. "See you soon, Leo," Dal said. He and Leo exchanged brotherly slaps on the back. Lena threw her arms around Leo's waist. "Be safe out there." "You too." Leo broke away and grabbed his bike. He was ready to move. Cassie straddled her bike, feet resting on the pedals. With one last wave at her friends, she rode away down Pole Mountain. Spreading out around her were Leo, Jennifer, Bruce, Spill, and Griggs. It was up to the 6 of them to destroy the bridge and eliminate the Russian colonists. "No big deal," Cassie muttered to herself. "All in a day's work." She wore a heavy backpack. Besides water and some food supplies, it was crammed with extra munitions magazines and a first aid kit. A Soviet machine gun hung around her neck. Leo had also outfitted her with a long knife and a 9mm. Once they hit the main road, Leo led them west along the narrow country lane. Cassie glanced in the direction of the Craigs, where a few cattle had been grazing. The family farmhouse looked lonely and sad in the distance. They pedaled in silence and soon entered the more heavily wooded area of Westville. Redwoods, bay trees, and pines grew on either side of the road. Bats flitted through the dusky light. "That was pretty radical when you trumped Leo with chess queen trivia and convinced him to let us be part of the mission," Jennifer said. "He'd have sidelined you for sure. He would have tried to sideline me." "I wasn't trying to trump him," Cassie replied. "He just wants to protect us. But we all have to do our part." "You're right about that." Jennifer grimaced as a bat swooped past her face. "God, I hate bats." "You shouldn't hate bats. They're important pollinators." Jennifer shook her head. "They're creepy. They're cute. They're sort of like tiny cats with wings. More like icky mice with wings." "We'll just have to agree to disagree," Cassie said. "We'll just have to agree to disagree." From a not-so-distant past, Cassie heard her mom's voice. Cassie had been standing in the bathroom, pulling her hair into its customary ponytail, attempting to tame the frizz with liberal amounts of Aquanet. "You really should do more with your hair," her mother complained. "It's so plain all the time." "It's fine, Mom," Jennifer said, bumping their mom out of the way as she joined Cassie in the bathroom. "Cassie will never get a boyfriend looking like that." "We'll just have to agree to disagree, Mom," Jennifer said. "Mom is a bitter person," Jennifer murmured, obviously recalling the same memory as Cassie. "Is or was?" Cassie asked. Jennifer sighed. "I don't know." Then more to herself. "She'd probably have a heart attack if she knew you were with Leo." That made Cassie smile. Not the part about their mom having a heart attack, the part about Cassie being with Leo. She was secretly starting to think of him as her boyfriend, though she hadn't been brave enough to say it out loud to him yet. The two girls were far enough behind the boys that Cassie thought it was safe to talk. "He said you threatened to stab him in the heart with one of your high heels." "I did." Jennifer smiled as though recalling a fond memory. "I could tell he liked you right away. I was trying to get him to do something about it." "Why doesn't it bother you?" "That you guys like each other? Why should it? You're my sister. He's my friend. I love you both. You deserve to be happy." Cassie absorbed her words. "Thanks, Jen." "No prob. Besides, I always knew you had a crush on him. You used to follow him around the house with your tongue hanging out of your mouth when we were dating." "Did not." "Did too." Cassie felt her face grow warm. Maybe she had been a little obvious in her infatuation back then. Well, could anyone really blame her? Leo was awesome. "Just do me a favor, okay?" Jennifer said. "What's that?" "Don't get pregnant." "Jen, we aren't—" "I'm not prying. It's none of my business, and you don't need my permission. Just promise me you'll use protection. Okay?" "Okay." Cassie fell silent. This was embarrassing to talk about, even with her big sister. They reached the outskirts of Westville. A scattering of homes, motels, and restaurants sprang up on either side of the road. There were bodies everywhere. Cassie squinted into the gloom. It was getting hard to see beneath the trees, but she was able to detect evidence of Nejet infection on the closest corpses. How many days had it been since the invasion began? Cassie had lost count. It felt like years, but it had probably been a little over a week. Enough time for the zombies to start dying off. "It's happening like the Russians said it would," Jennifer said quietly. The smell was ungodly. Cassie was torn between breathing through her nose or through her mouth. She should have thought to bring a bandana. The farther they advanced into the tiny riverside town, the more corpses they saw. There were dead lying in the doorways of buildings. They dotted the road, creating an obstacle course for their bikes. Crows and vultures had already moved in. They hopped among the bodies, pecking at the infected flesh. "Do you think the birds can get infected?" Jennifer whispered. God, Cassie hoped not. Most viruses don't cross between species. Most? Most. Jennifer pedaled faster. Cassie kept up with her. They soon caught up with the guys. "Those fuckheads did a good job of wiping out this community," Griggs said. "They did," Leo agreed. "The Russian bastards need to die." Bruce's eyes had acquired a dangerous glint ever since Anton had ridden off with Tate. Cassie did not envy any Russian who came up against him. "How do you suppose they plan to dispose of all the bodies?" Spill asked. "They have 4 buses full of people on their way here. They're going to need to clear the bodies out." "Not our problem," Leo said. "Yet." Cassie knew what he meant. If they survived, if their country emerged intact from this war, there would be thousands of dead to dispose of. Her mind flashed back to pictures she'd seen of Auschwitz in her history book, of the giant crematoriums where the Jews were burned. Was that what waited in the future for America, except for zombie corpses instead of Jewish ones? It wasn't so different, Cassie realized. Both were murdered innocents. They just died from different means. Something loud clanged off to their left. Cassie's head swiveled as she scanned the land that darkened around her. Something was out there. "Move faster," Leo ordered. "We need to get out of sight." Cassie leaned into her handlebars, pedaling as fast as she could. Rancid air flowed over her. She was sweating from both exertion and fear. Another crash sounded from their left, though farther behind them this time. A second later came a growl. Cassie looked over her shoulder in time to see a mutant leap out of the undergrowth. It looked like a female. Her chest was distended with corded muscle that had torn her shirt. Her right arm was grossly deformed, the muscles swollen to 3 times their normal size. The mutant's eyes glowed in the dark like an animal's. She fixed her gaze on the bikers and charged down the road in their direction. She flowed through the night like a shadow, her limbs barely making a sound as they struck the pavement. She ran on all 4s like an animal. Her lopsided muscle mass barely slowed her down. "Mutant!" Cassie hissed. "There's a mutant!" "I see it. Keep pedaling." Leo spun his bike around and slammed on his brakes. Cassie put her head down and followed orders. Even though her heart clenched as she flew past Leo, she didn't want to mess up his plan. To her surprise, Jennifer stayed with her. So did Bruce. "Faster, Cass," Jennifer huffed between short breaths. Shots cracked. The mutant kept coming. Spill and Griggs had stopped beside Leo, all 3 of them shooting. It was hard to see. The mutant moved freakishly fast. The guys never let up. The mutant was 50 yards away when she finally howled and crashed to the ground. Leo fired one more shot. The thing went completely still. Cassie didn't let up on the pedals. Her heart pounded in her chest, and not just because she was pedaling hard. She had thought Hillsburg had been scary. At least it had been daylight when they attacked there. Riding through the dark, forested town of Westville was creepy as hell. Chapter 33. Adventure Depot. Leo realized how isolated they'd been from the true horrors unfolding around them in West County. In a little over a week, their world had become a slaughterhouse. He jumped back onto his bike and pedaled after Cassie, Bruce, and Jennifer. Up ahead in the gloom, he saw the wooden sign for the Adventure Depot. It was at least 20 years old. The paint was faded, peeling and barely legible. If Leo hadn't known what to look for, he would have ridden right by it. They dropped their bikes as they pulled to a stop in front of the old shop. It was nothing more than an oversized shed. The canoes and kayaks sat in several large stacks off to one side, wedged between old-growth redwood trees. "Everyone, grab a kayak," Leo said. They were lighter than canoes and would be the quickest way to paddle down the river. The Adventure Depot backed up to the waters of the Russian River. Depending on where you were, the river was anywhere from 20 to 50 feet wide. This late in the summer, the water was low enough that a few small rocky islands cropped up. It was a short walk through the trees down to the riverbank. Leo had thought the smell along the highway was bad. Nothing prepared him for the carnage along the water. It shouldn't have surprised him, he supposed. All creatures needed to drink. Why should the Nejet be any different? On top of that, the tourist economy was robust along the river. Lots of people came to camp or spend the day swimming. There had been hundreds of zombies here at one point. As Leo picked his way among the bodies, he tried to imagine what it must have been like during the initial invasion. This town had clearly been overrun. Cassie would have been among the dead if the Nielsen house hadn't been tucked back in the woods. "Keep your eyes out for mutants," he said. They'd be idiots to think they were alone out here. Statistically, with so many dead zombies, there had to be a number of mutants around. And they hadn't exactly been quiet when they killed the one on the road. They reached the water without incident. Leo waded in first in his jeans and farmer's work boots. The water was chilly, but not unpleasant. A dead body floated by. Leo pushed it away with his paddle, keeping it away from his people. "Leo!" Jennifer's sharp hiss drew his attention. She pointed downstream to where two deformed figures made their way out of the trees. Shit! Mutants! They stalked toward the water, eyes fixed on Leo's group. "Everyone, get into your kayak," Leo whispered. "Stay together. Griggs, Spill, help me shoot them as we paddle by." He waited until everyone else was paddling downriver before climbing into his kayak. Leo pushed with his paddle, quickly catching up with the others. There wasn't much of a current this time of year, but the paddles quickly pulled them abreast of the mutants. Leo had his .22 in hand. The two creatures were nearly to the water's edge, but for some reason, they didn't attack. "Do we shoot?" Spill asked, frowning as he took in the mutants' hesitation. "Only if they attack," Leo said. Gunfire would just draw more attention. They'd made enough noise back on the road. It was better to get away quietly, if they could. A growl ripped out from a mutant. Eyes glowed in the growing darkness. Leo felt the two creatures homing in on them. He raised his .22, ready to fire. Griggs and Spill both poised, ready to fire. But the mutants didn't enter the water. They broke into a lope, running alongside the river and keeping abreast of Leo's team. "Should I shoot them?" Griggs asked. "Wait." Leo watched the mutants. They stayed a solid 5 feet away from the water. Why was that? The riverfront abruptly ended in a tall cliff that climbed nearly 200 feet into the air. The top was studded with redwood trees. The river cut around the cliff. As soon as they rounded the bend, the mutants disappeared from sight. Leo heard them growling in frustration, but they didn't follow. "Did you see that?" Jennifer said. "They stopped. They didn't try to swim after us." "They wouldn't even get into the water," Cassie said. "Maybe they're afraid of it." Griggs lowered his weapon. Leo filed away this piece of intel for later examination. He didn't know what it meant, but it could be important. It could also be an isolated incident. The next mutants they came across might not hesitate to charge into the water after them. The current continued to suck them along. They made good time, their paddles softly cutting water. The moon and stars came out, bathing the water in cold, white light. Leo's eyes quickly adjusted. He watched the river, alert for portages. He did his best to steer around any he saw. A few times their boats scraped against the rocky bottom, but they never stalled. Cabins dotted the riverside, many of them with their own private docks. There were bodies in the water, along with floating pieces of garbage often found on the river. More bodies were on the docks. The air was ripe with the smell of rot. He kept his ears peeled for any sound of Russians and mutants. A few times they heard cars on the road that followed the river. He could only assume it was Russian troops driving around, though he couldn't fathom what they were doing out here at night. They'd effectively wiped out Westville and probably all the other small communities along the river. They'd been paddling for nearly 2 hours when Cassie spoke up. "Leo, did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "I heard it," Spill whispered. "It sounded like a mutant." Several long, low growls reached Leo's ears. A shiver crawled down his spine. "Where are they?" He lifted his .22 in one hand, gripping his paddle in the other. "Anyone see them?" The growls sounded again. This time, there were more of them. Leo swung his head back and forth, peering into the darkness. Where were they? Could they be up in the trees? Could they— "Look out!" Bruce cried. A tire sailed out of the darkness, coming straight for Leo. Chapter 34. Bridge. Leo had just enough time to throw himself out of the kayak before the tire landed. It clipped him in the leg, delivering a jolt of pain that radiated up his thigh. Water rushed into his nose and mouth. He burst back to the surface of the river, legs kicking. Luckily, it was late summer, when the river was at its lowest. His boots connected with the gravelly bottom just as more debris sailed out of the dark. "Heads up!" Spill cried. Rocks, a picnic basket, an empty toolbox, a hammer. Leo came to grips with their situation between a mouthful of water and a crowbar hitting the water a mere foot from him. Apparently, Cassie's rock-throwing mutant hadn't been an anomaly. There were mutants attacking them, but from where? There was too much chaos to get his bearings. His group was in disarray, everyone shouting and trying to dodge the attack. Paddles and kayaks drifted downriver without them. They were making enough noise to wake Russians all the way back in Sebastopol. Where the hell was Cassie? "South Shore!" Leo barked. "Everyone, get to the South Shore!" He spotted Cassie's silhouette off to his left. She yelped as a discarded ice chest flew in her direction. Leo tackled her, pushing her sideways and submerging her in the water. The ice chest made a loud thunk in the water as it landed. He latched onto Cassie's shirt and pulled her to the surface. She coughed and sputtered. Her hands twisted into the front of his shirt as she clung to him. "They're on the monorail bridge," she gasped. She was right. Leo hadn't realized they'd come so far downstream. He could just make out the old truss bridge that spanned the river. It was something of a historical landmark in the tiny river town of Monorio. On the bridge, there were no less than 3 mutants. Another tire sailed through the air. Leo shielded Cassie with his body and hustled her to the shore. "Where the hell are they getting all their ammunition?" he growled as the tire hit the water. Had they raided a junkyard? He raised his hunting rifle as Spill, Bruce, Jennifer, and Griggs hustled onto the shore. "Either of you guys a good shot in the dark?" he asked the soldiers. "I am." Spill stopped beside him and raised a machine gun, taking aim at the bridge. "The rest of you, get to the trees and stay out of sight," Leo ordered. He threw all his focus into the mutants on the bridge. Now that he didn't have a face full of water, he could see there were several wrecked cars on Monorail Bridge. That's where the mutants were getting their ammunition. A baby car seat flew off the bridge, coming straight for Leo and Spill. It was followed closely by a suitcase. "Damn it!" Leo dodged sideways. The suitcase hit the ground and split open, spilling clothes all along the riverfront. He couldn't stand still long enough to get in a good shot. He crouched low and raced to the trunk of a large tree that lay on the shore. It wasn't uncommon for fallen trees to wash up during the winter. The locals usually left them wherever they landed. He dropped down behind the tree, breathing hard. Spill skidded to his knees beside him. Both men rested the barrels of their weapons on the tree, taking aim at the mutants. More items flew at them through the night, but they had some protection now. Leo held steady and took aim at the figures on the bridge. He was a good shot, but a headshot at 100 yards in the dark was going to be a tall order. Beside him, Spill began to fire. Bullets sparked off the trusses of the bridge. The mutants howled as he hit one of them in the shoulder. Leo's first shot pinged off a car. He swore and readjusted. The slight wind along the river had thrown off his shot. He fired again. This one landed, but it wasn't a headshot. All he did was piss the thing off. He and Spill kept firing. Leo finally hit one of the monsters, dropping him to the ground. The others howled in fury. Leo had thought the situation couldn't get any worse. He was wrong. As soon as he killed the first mutant, the other 2 scattered. They loped off the south side of the bridge, their deformed bodies disappearing from sight. "Shit," he breathed. He knew without a doubt the mutants were coming for them. This may have been their plan all along, to drive them out of the water. "River," he barked, looking for his companions at the tree line. "The mutants are coming." Cassie, Jennifer, Bruce, and Griggs barreled out of the darkness, running hard for the water. As they did, Leo saw another 2 mutants scuttle north across the bridge. They were gone before he could even raise his rifle. Shit! Were those the same 2 they'd been firing at, or were those new ones? It was impossible to know. "Hurry up!" He splashed into the water. The kayaks and paddles had drifted downstream. They were going to have to swim. With any luck, they could catch up with their kayaks. Cassie and the others piled into the water. Laden with waterlogged jeans, guns, and backpacks of supplies, none of them were buoyant. Still, they threw themselves into the deepest part of the current in the middle of the river and began to dog paddle. Long strands of algae slithered up from the river bottom, feathering along their bodies. Leo brought up the rear. He alternated between scanning the shoreline and keeping one eye on the water. His knee connected painfully with a rock in the water. He swallowed back a curse. They reached Monorio Bridge. Leo stopped just before swimming underneath it, standing up out of the water. The sodden backpack was an unwieldy counterweight. Leo raised his rifle, keeping watch to make sure no other mutants showed up to attack his companions. As soon as the 5 of them were safely on the other side and swimming away, he hurried after them. A hull went up to his left. Leo jerked instinctively in that direction, but all he could see was a solid line of dark trees. Several more howls went up from his right. Fucking shit! There were mutants on both sides of the river. "We are fucked," Spill murmured beside him. Leo gritted his teeth. He refused to go down. They could survive this. They just had to get past the mutants and farther downriver. They just had to. Several rocks sailed out of the darkness. Leo's heart froze as Cassie screamed. The rock collided with her shoulder, sending her sideways through the water. Jennifer reached her first and pulled her up. Leo took aim at the shoreline, looking for the attacking mutant. More rocks flew out of the tree line, all of them coming from the north side of the river. He couldn't see a fucking thing. The trees were too thick and grew right up to the side of the water. The onslaught intensified. Griggs let up a string of curses as he was hit in the chest. Leo had to get them out of here. They couldn't outswim the mutants. Not unless he wanted to risk one of them getting hit in the head. "South Shore!" he barked. There were mutants on that side as well, but for the moment it was the lesser of two evils. "Hurry! Shit!" he swore as a rock the size of his head careened straight for him. He dove sideways and swam as fast as he could. More rocks rained down all around them. The south side of the river didn't have a shoreline. The currents had cut a small bluff into the base of the tree line. Cassie and Jennifer were just ahead of him, the 2 girls scrambling on the bluff. They grabbed exposed tree roots, pulling themselves up the embankment. The howls behind them went up in pitch. The sound grated along his bones. He knew for a fact this was their pissed-off sound. Even worse, their howls were met by more howls, this time from the south side of the river where they were. From the sound of things, there were a lot more than 2 of them. It sounded like there was a whole pack of them on both sides of the river. Leo boosted himself over the bluff and crawled into the concealment of the trees. His breath sought in and out of his lungs as the mutants continued to howl. They had to move, find some place to hide. "Stay together," Leo whispered. "Follow the river south. Look for a place to hide. Shoot anything that moves." They fell into a tight line. Griggs led the way. Leo brought up the rear. They threaded their way through the trees. Leo's wet clothes and sodden backpack felt like they weighed an extra 50 pounds. Even worse, the wind picked up along the river. It was getting cold. If they ever found a safe place to hide, they needed to get dry. The woods went eerily quiet. Was that a good sign? Or were they royally fucked? Leo strained his ears, listening for signs of pursuit. The trees fell away, opening up to a large rocky beach. Discarded canoes lay near the trees. There was none of the usual river flotsam on this beach. No garbage or forgotten pieces of clothing. There were no bodies either. It looked oddly pristine. "Anyone think it's weird there are no bodies here?" Cassie whispered. "There were bodies on the other beaches we saw." Her question made his skin crawl. "Maybe it's a private beach." Leo's words fell flat. All his instincts told him something was off. He just didn't know what was off. "Stay in the tree line," he said. No way was he going to risk them going out in the open. "Stay alert. Something's not right." No one argued with this. Griggs once again led the way, picking his way through the ferns and redwoods. Leo noticed they'd entered an old-growth section of the woods. The trees were Goliaths, some of them as much as 6 feet in diameter. He racked his brain, trying to figure out where they were. There weren't a lot of old-growth redwoods in his area. One nearby state park that boasted an old-growth grove, but it was miles away from the Russian River. He'd never heard of one on the south side of the river. Maybe they were on someone's private property. Maybe— "Look out!" Cassie screamed. Burning pain lanced up his left side. Gunfire rang in his ears.